What drives someone to change the world? Welcome to Social Trailblazers, where we seek to answer just that question. Join Kelly Gagnon, CEO of Nonprofit Marketing Nerd, as she interviews leading social innovators and nonprofit changemakers. This podcast is brought to you by DonorBox, the easiest way for nonprofits to rock their online donations.
In this episode of Social Trailblazers, I sit down with Bruce Nims, an influential civic leader in my home community of Decatur, Illinois, and honestly, one of my favorite humans, especially when it comes to nerding out about nonprofits and entrepreneurship. After a successful career as a tech startup founder in information technology, Bruce now dedicates and donates his time to civic engagement and effective board governance for nonprofits. In this episode, we also talk about how Bruce, at an important time in his life, dedicated his time, energy, and talent to renovating a vacant Texaco Station into what I now think is one of the hidden gems of our community. We discuss his passion for good board governance training, and why he made the shift from corporate leadership to community-focused initiatives. Join me and Bruce, one of my favorite people, for an inspiring conversation on leadership, community revitalization, human nature, and the importance of giving back. Okay, I'm so excited to have not only one of my favorite humans joining us today for Social Trailblazers, but also really a great leader in the community and entrepreneur and philanthropist that I think everyone can learn from. So Bruce, I'm so excited to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So I would like to kind of jump right in. And I know it's something you're a very humble human. You don't talk a lot about your career prior to what you're spending most of your days really doing civic and community oriented roles. What inspired your shift from entrepreneurship and for-profit work into more civic engagement work?
Well, I think it had to do with realizing the load that I was under in my career. Started a company and grew it over a 26-year period, and every day was just marvelous. Just had a great time. We had an excellent team of people that were causing the company to grow and prosper and do good things. And when we sold the company, I was advised to take some time off. Just go and don't sign up for anything for 6 months. And what I realized during that time was, over the 26 years of the company growing, and the load, the burden on me got a little bit heavier each day or each minute. And I didn't notice that, quite frankly, until it was gone. And I thought, well, this is pretty nice too. And so I decided not to go back into another commercial enterprise right away. Or if I did, I'd say, well, I'll do it, but only if I can just be kind of half speed, let somebody else take some of the burden. And then I started thinking about me, and I'm not a very good half speed kind of guy. Either I'm in or I'm not in. So I just decided at that point, I was fortunate enough with the first venture that I could be not in from then on. And so decided to go to do some things with the local university. And then I got into the governing board training and decided that those were the things that I wanted to spend my time with. And then I got to know a lot more about the community because during my work, it was not very inside this community focused. It was central United States. And so I didn't really didn't know a lot about what was going on here in town.
Yeah, and I will say, for listeners, Bruce and I are both based in Decatur, Illinois. Chances are Bruce, especially if you're in the nonprofit space. Definitely if you've served on a board. I know Bruce has donated a lot of his time to a lot of different boards and causes in our community. And I think I was trying to figure out, where did I first meet Bruce? Do you have any idea, Bruce?
Yeah, I thought about that too, and I can't come up with it, Kelly. It's been a long, long time ago, but I don't know where that was.
Yeah,
seems like I've always known you.
Yeah. That's how I feel as well. I'm fortunate enough to be one of the entrepreneurs that I think benefits from. A lot of entrepreneurs don't get the support of someone that's already lived the experience, and so I'm so fortunate to have you as a friend and mentor and unofficial coach, but I know you actually work with a lot of youth entrepreneurs. Will you talk a little bit more about kind of what you're doing now and why you enjoy it?
I have learned a lot of things in my life, and actually, I'll kind of spool back just a little bit. At one point in our company activities, we had people develop a personal mission statement. And the personal mission statement that I came up with many, many years ago was learn, teach, enjoy life. And so I continue to learn. Every time I sit down with you, I learn something, which is partly why I do that. But I have learned a lot of things, and I like to pass that along to somebody. If somebody else can use that, that would be great. A couple of weeks ago, I visited with a high school CEO group, which is a group of aspiring entrepreneurs who are at junior, senior level in high school, and they were just a kick to be with, and some of the things to some of the people I think had good value. So I just enjoy the opportunity to share some of the things that I've learned that I'm not using as much anymore, but hopefully they can find value in that.
So I want to kind of switch gears a little bit. And I know for those of you that are joining and watching this episode via YouTube or LinkedIn, you're going to get the privilege of seeing some of those images yourself. Bruce talked a little bit. The first question I asked you was, what was the shift? And you talked about selling your company and what that transition looks like, and that you decided not to re-enter the for-profit space. But you said you were told to do nothing, but I personally know that's not true. Would you talk a little bit about the Texaco Station project for you? And I guess why did you do it?
Yeah. So I'm not a good one to do nothing, quite frankly. I've worked at retiring a couple of times and kind of gave up on that. I like to keep busy. I like to do things. I like to fix things. And I like to work with my hands, and I like to do research. So all those things. And on my way around Decatur, I would go back and forth past this old 1930s Texaco Station that had seen much, much better days, and decided, somebody ought to, and we've all done this. You go by this old crumbling thing and you say, somebody ought to do something about that. Well, it turned out I was the guy. So I decided that I was going to look into acquiring that property and then restoring it to what I thought were its glory days. And I had time based on my not doing anything to get a project under my belt. And I liked going in there and turning the music on and working on it. And there were some things I couldn't do, and I was able to hire somebody to do the more complicated stuff, and got to research gasoline pollution of the land, which was not a fun thing to get into, but that was a part of that kind of a project. And, learning about how Texaco stations used to look. And you go, I remember the first time I went online just to look and see what kind of things you could buy for, an old Texaco station. And there were thousands of things out there. There are people whose lives are, collecting things from old filling stations. So it was just a whole new area to get into. Very satisfying. And a great part about fixing up an old station like that is when you're tired of it, you lock the door and you go home, and you just let it sit for a week or two and nobody cares. So it was just a very pleasant project for me to work on with other people, and to get some professional assistance along the way.
And I will say, and Luis, my partner in life, but also nonprofit marketing nerds, head of strategic partnerships, that Luis and I had the the true pleasure of touring the space with you a couple weeks ago. And I will tell you that I felt like such a little kid. Like, I was just smiling from eye to eye. It was such a cool thing. It was such a cool thing learning about the process. I know for people that are watching the episode, they're getting the benefit of seeing a lot of the images and video from the project. But thank you not just for doing the project, but for opening the space up to others and for showing me.
Yeah, that's part of as I say, that's the compensation I get for doing that kind of project, because it was not a financial boon to my well-being, but people like it. People like to come and look at it. They tell stories about, I remember when I was a kid, like you said, and we did this and that. Somebody came in and said, "Oh yeah, I got my first job here, changing oil." So it's very rewarding to have a piece of the history of the community.
Yeah, and I think it's a piece of my history. I remember one of my first, I guess I've never told you this, Bruce, like when I think of like, when was I, not like at my best, but when was I really stepping into my space as someone making social impact, right? We're talking about social trailblazing. And I was the chair of or co-chair maybe with your daughter, the co-chair of the Young Philanthropist Giving Circle. And we hosted an event and it was magical. It was authentic. It was connected to history. And I think that was my first feeling of like, I am making an impact and doing good. And it was connected to
somebody.
I'm somebody. Yeah. Now I think that feeling maybe is what I don't want to have. So you ended that project, and I don't know your personal timeline. You ended that project, and then some time passed where you were maybe done with the renovation of the project. How long before you stumbled across what I would call your next project, the Culver House?
Well, as I finished that, and finished is probably not a correct term, because it always needs, it's an old garage and it always needs something. But as I got over the big hump there, I decided I really enjoyed that process, but I did it almost all by myself. And that was maybe not as rewarding as it could have been. So I thought, wouldn't it be fun to have a group of people who are doing this all together? And so it was probably just a year or so after I finished my current project that I was invited to a meeting about the Culver House, which had been built in the late 1800s, started being built in the late 1800s, and had a nice history for a while. And then, like a lot of things, it went downhill. And a group was putting it back together, had been putting it back together for quite some time, kind of in fits and starts. And they were looking for new blood to join the group. And it looked like an appealing project to me, so I jumped into that one.
This episode is brought to you by DonorBox, the online fundraising platform that streamlines your process, elevates your donations, and ensures a user-friendly experience for your supporters. Explore the world of simplified, seamless fundraising at DonorBox.org today.
Will you share a little bit about the Culver House? And I know at some point it was scheduled to be demolished.
It was. This was prior to me. It had been the home of the Culver family for, I don't know, maybe 50 years, something like that. And then when they moved out, they rented it, and then they cut it into a couple of apartments and rented it. And then as time went on and it started to deteriorate a little bit, they cut it into more and more, other owners cut it into more and more apartments that were, less appealing, less attractive. Yeah. And then at some point there was a big fire and burned off this very interesting peaked roof and so forth. There are 2 turrets on the building and so forth. But that fire just kind of, really put it on its last legs. And somebody owned it, and they were supposed to be fixing it. They weren't fixing it. And HUD, the Housing and Urban Development, part of the government, got involved. And so a group of concerned citizens in Decatur formed the Historic Decatur Foundation, said, we need to not knock this thing down. It's just too important in our history. But through all this machinations, they couldn't get a clear title to the building. And so at some point the city was going to knock it down, and there was literally the bulldozer on the front lawn. They had bulldozed through the little fence that stood in front, and one of the ladies that was one of the spearheading people, she stood out in front of the bulldozer and said, I got somebody that just ran down to City Hall, and they're going to bring back a cease and desist order, but so don't knock me over yet. And basically they came back with it and they stopped the bulldozer. So it's pretty cool.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. And it's come from there to, I know we've bought tickets for an event you have coming up right before Halloween for Edgar.
Right.
Yeah. So it's wow, what an amazing experience.
And that one's not finished, never will be, but I mean, we still have a lot more work to do, a lot more money to put together to do some work, but it's just a rewarding activity to be engaged in.
I'd love to hear a little bit more from you. I know that you've gone from, like you said, right, your business was in central U.S., and oftentimes I think for business leaders, you get pulled away from your community to work all the time or make an impact or make sure you're going to meetings. So you've now spent the last 20 years being primarily, if not exclusively, focused on the needs of your community. And I could make a long list. I did not research, but even just thinking, I'm like, well, that's like 8 boards I know he's served on, and I'm sure there's more. So in your board experience, and we're going to dive into board governance, but in your board experience, talk to me a little bit about what you see as a typical board of directors struggle. Yeah,
probably the best thing I could describe is almost all of the board members that I've met have been interested in helping. They want to make a difference. They want to contribute. And almost all of them don't know how to do that. And so they do the best they can. We make it up as we go along. I remember the first board that I got on, and I didn't know how to do that. I didn't even know there were boards, probably. Right. And somebody said, you ought to get on this board. And I did. And I thought, well, I'll go to the meeting, and I'll just watch what everybody does, and I'll do that. Well, everybody's going every which direction. And so everybody was just trying to do the best they could, but they really didn't know what their job was. And that got me interested in, trying to figure that out. So my mind is fairly rational and structured. So I was a math major. I was in information technology, very, very yes, no kinds of things. And that's not the way a lot of the world works. And so I think for me, it was valuable to learn about how should a board work? What are we supposed to do? How do you do that? And that has been helpful to me. So I hope that I can, again, share some of that knowledge with some other folks. I think that the impact of a good board of directors on a nonprofit organization is enormous. And if you want your nonprofit organization to have greater impact on improving the community, if you had 8 or 10 smart, knowledgeable, interested, hardworking people pulling the organization along, it's huge. And we just don't use that capability as much as we could.
How do you know a board is functioning well? What does a good board look like?
A good board talks about board level things, not operational things. And so it talks about things like the future and where are we headed and what are our 5-year plans and how are we progressing towards the goals that we have established. And so it has a strategic plan. It has regular, at the board meetings, it has regular performance to goals discussions. Mm-hmm. And if things start going haywire, then they say we need to do something. We don't just wait another 2 years and hope it goes away. So those would be some of the things I would see. The attendance at the board meetings is high. The board meetings do not last a long time. There are committees that are performing well and effectively that bring proposals to the board. So that's a handful of things, I guess, that I would toss out. A good board also talks about how well they're doing. It evaluates their own work and says, how can we be better at this? Just like any employee in any organization, you want them to think about how good a job am I doing and what could I do to be a better person in this role? A board ought to do that too. And that way we stop that decline. We have an opportunity to rise to be better next time.
And one of the things I've stolen from you, which we're kind of getting, Bruce, now you spend a lot of your time and donated time and talent doing board governance training with nonprofit organizations, which is a wonderful donation of your time. I know so many nonprofits that have benefited from it. But one of the things I've stolen from you is just the phrase that, like, board governance and being a good board member, it's not intrinsic. You don't just wake up knowing it, right? You have to learn how to be a good board member. And so I've stolen that a lot to kind of help boards practice grace with self as they're learning about effective board governance.
Right. Yep. I like that. Yeah. And I think we all want to do a good job. We're just not quite sure what that job is.
And where do you see boards once you get in governance maybe still struggle after you've been learning those things?
One thing that pops to mind is that structure and discipline breaks down over time. And so we might go in and say, okay, we're ready. We got it all organized. We got it just the way we want it. Let's go. Well, then 2 months later, somebody doesn't show up for a meeting. And so they lose track of that little piece of it. And then we bring a new board member in and they're not tuned in, and things happen. And so it just kind of goes down. And we got to keep it going up. And we don't always pay attention to that. So the continuing education, the continuing discussion about how are we doing as a board? What should we be doing better as a board? I think that's where the boards need to spend some time and energy.
And, you talked about consistency. And I would say anyone that knows you probably says one of the biggest things they know about you is how consistent you are, right? Like, you've been on governance training and you haven't gotten sick of it yet, right? You're like, a lot of people that are dealing with boards are like, I'm fed up, never mind. What keeps you wanting to continue doing that work?
Yeah, I have determined that, first of all, number one on the list of board member approaches is you should be passionate about the mission of the organization that you are on the board. If you're not passionate about the mission, go do something else. And so what I've determined and I have been on, as you mentioned, number of boards, but I find at this point in my life, my passion is sound board governance. And so I'm passionate about that. I want to spend my time and energy. I enjoy doing that in order to help all these other organizations, elevate their impact on the community. So the answer to your question is that's my passion. And when you're passionate about something, it doesn't feel like work. It doesn't feel like an imposition. It's what you love to do. And I tell that to people when I go teach these classes. I'm just having a ball. This is what I like to do. So, and board structure and so forth is not a typical thing that people get excited about, but that's, each of us gets to choose our own.
I'll just fully confess, for a lot of people from Decatur that are listening, one of the ways I think I first met you actually was you were a donor for a nonprofit I was kind of affiliated with. And I'll use affiliated loosely. But so many people want to get into the heads of people like you, right? Okay. So I want to switch gears a little bit. Like, put on your donor hat, your board governance hat off, donor hat on. What are you looking for when it comes to giving money to nonprofits, more than just mission alignment?
I like organizations that are interested in trying new things, and I won't say experimenting, but here's a new program that we'd like to get started, and we need some seed funding to give it a shot and get some data and see if we want to continue doing it. So I like the here's a new idea kind of thing. In our philanthropy, we have kind of two areas that we deal with. One area, probably the larger area, we have identified a small handful of types of organizations, types of projects that we're interested in helping with. One of my business partners a long time ago had gone to a seminar, and he said, there are 1,000 things out there you can do. pick a few and do those. And so we have done that with our major philanthropy, I would say. And that has to do with youth, has to do with education, has to do with international understanding, and the image and appearance of the community. So those are the general areas. And then within there, is there something going on that would have the opportunity to really push that envelope? And that would be something we'd be interested in talking about. And I know it's tough for a lot of organizations because people don't want to donate money to pay the power bill, and you need that money. So I understand that. But in particular for us, that's something new that might have an impact, I think has appealed to us.
And I do want to remind listeners, and one of the things that we tend to coach is you should not alter your programming to meet a donor needs, right? So I think it's interesting to hear, Bruce, where you are as a donor. What do you see nonprofits do that don't... No, I'll ask it the opposite way. What would you love to see more nonprofits do?
I'd like to see them measure results more. A lot of us are still measuring activity, and to a certain extent, I don't care how many classes we've taught, I want to see an increase in knowledge. And so it's a results orientation that I think is significant. In the community of Decatur, anyway, I can't speak for others, the nonprofit organizations seem to work well together. The collaboration rate seems very high, and I like that. And I'm always encouraged when there's a complementary formed some sort of a solution. So those are a couple things I'd say that pops to mind. And then other than let's do some research, find some other things that are being successful in other communities, and let's try them here. We don't need to make up a lot of new stuff. It's out there. We just need to understand what other people are doing. We don't have all communities. We don't have any unique problems. Another one of the folks that I have worked with in the past said, it's not the problems that we have are unique, but if we can figure out how to solve them, that'd be a big deal.
And I do hope the nonprofits that are listening do listen to all of your advice about measuring results. That is important, regardless.
And it's not always easy to do, but it's what's important.
Yeah.
And and that may be one of the things I learned from my business world was, you don't measure how many hours you work. You measure how much money came in, or how many clients were satisfied, or how many projects were completed. And that's the results orientation.
Looking ahead, what community projects or even personal goals are you most excited about?
My point in life is there's a lot of looking behind at this stage in my life. So I'm not in the mode of ramping up a lot to tackle some big thing in my future. I'm hopeful that the things that I'm doing are valuable to folks. If they are, I hope that there are other people that I can entice into working with me so I can hand off, like this board training class. I've taught in this community, I've probably taught 50 of them in the past 10, 15 years, and I'd like those to continue on after I'm done. So I'd say finding other people to take over some of the things that I'm doing or along things like that. But there are a lot of things that I'm excited about in the community. Think Well Makerspace. I'm just kind of getting in on the ground floor of that. There's people working real hard to stimulate the thinking in the community to aid makers and entrepreneurs. And so if I can help with those kinds of things, that's a pretty good day for me.
And I know that I benefit very much from your brain and your constantly pushing me to be a better human and better entrepreneur. So I want to thank you for that.
My pleasure.
I will put in the show notes for anyone that's listening or watching links to the Texaco Station website. So you already caught some pictures if you're watching, but links to the Texaco Station website. Also links to the board governance class if you are based in Decatur or Central Illinois to learn more about it. And if you are not based there, we're like, my community should do something like that. I do encourage you to check out that website and information and see what that model looks like.
It's not rocket science. It's pretty straightforward stuff, but you have to want to work on it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's such an amazing, unique thing that it's a free resource in the community. Most other communities, Bruce, it's a cost to get in the door to get that training, right? And then it's a wonderful resource in the community.
The Community Foundation has been very effective in supporting me on that, and actually they've kind of absorbed the management of that class and all the marketing and enrollment and so forth. So kudos to them for making that all happen.
And if you're, I will now. I'm going to do a final push, and we do have episodes in the show notes from 2 different members of the Community Foundation to learn more about the people that are doing that work. If people are wanting to connect with you or learn more about the Culver House or the Texaco Station, other than the websites, where can they find you?
They can contact me through my email address. It's bnims@nims.com. You can put that in the notes if you'd like. I just had a contact from a fellow that had been in a governance class, and he's now in St. Louis. And he said, would you come down to St. Louis and talk to my board? And I thought, well, maybe. I'd rather kind of stay relatively local, but I'm happy to talk with people and point them in the direction of other information that would be valuable to them as well.
Bruce, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your time, talents, and treasures with all of the listeners. And thank you.
My pleasure. It was very enjoyable. Thanks.
Into Social Trailblazers. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who are passionate about making a difference. Special thanks to our sponsor, Donor Box, for supporting this podcast and the incredible work of nonprofits everywhere. Join us next time as we continue to dive deep into the motivations of the change makers shaping our world. Until then, keep trailblazing.